onwards we go. And Simon Shaw is our next speaker. And Simon, are you there? Hello. He was the co-investigator at Food at Home, a knowledge exchange report exploring disabled and older people's access to food in their own homes. I was happy to say that I played a tiny part in that. And this is an excellent report. And I think that you're going to find it very interesting. So over to you, Simon.
Brilliant. Hi, everybody. Just give me a moment to share my slides. Okay, is that working okay?
Uh, yes,
Brilliant.
fine. That's great.
Thanks. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name's Simon Shaw, as Leslie said, and I've been working with Dr. Hannah Lambie-Mumford at the University of Sheffield on a project called Food at Home. It's a knowledge exchange project, so quite a small scale project in terms of timeline and scope, but exploring the really important issue of disabled and older people's access to food in their own homes, which Hannah and I have been collaborating in different ways for a few years now. And it's a piece of work that came partly out of the work Hannah and others led during the pandemic, exploring access to food at that time, including, for example, the shielding boxes and Meals on Wheels. And then my own interest, particularly influenced by the work I led at Sustain around access to Meals on Wheels, and also my Churchill Fellowship, where I travelled to France, Italy, and South Korea to explore how they promote particularly Meals on Wheels, but also other kinds of food access initiatives for older and disabled people. So we came together to actually try and get a bit more of an in-depth look and an update into what is happening currently in the UK around disabled and older people's access to food in their home, and really importantly, hear from disabled and older people themselves about their own experiences. So Hannah sent her apologies. She was just unable to make this slot today due to her other commitments, but hopefully I can do us both justice. I'll just sort of go briefly through how we sort of approach the project and then talk in more detail about some of the findings, the recommendations, and obviously can take questions at the end as well. Oh, yes. Sorry, just having some technical issues. So it's a knowledge exchange project, so we weren't setting out to generate lots of new data. We were setting out really to bring stakeholders and people with lived experience to share knowledge and experiences around the key barriers to food access for older and disabled people in the UK, the opportunities and challenges for services in supporting that access for those two groups in particular. We often talk about older and disabled people. We're fully aware that disabled people get older, older people live with a lot of older people live with disabilities and health conditions. So while we sort of talk about older and disabled people, we're thinking a sort of a diverse and mixed group of people. And we also looked partly as well as part of this project at how disabled and older people are involved in policy and practice discussions. So we tried to gather some evidence around that too. And so we had some workshops with NGO, voluntary sector, government stakeholders from across the four nations, which was really excellent aspect of the project to hear from people across the four nations, and some supplementary interviews as well, particularly with people that couldn't make our workshops. And then we had a number of workshops type meetings with people with lived experience, talk about their experiences of preparing and cooking food in their own homes and the kind of support they need, including informal, formal, and formal support. And we've published a report setting out the findings and recommendations. I'm sure the link can be shared after this, and I'll share it at the end as well. And we have proposed some recommendations for different audiences as well. So in terms of the key food access issues, I imagine for this audience, a lot of these won't come as a surprise, but we hope we provide a sort of updated view of some of those issues, particularly bringing in some sort of some recent changes in terms of equipment, etc., that have come online in the last few years. So unsurprisingly, people did talk a lot about the additional costs they can face as someone with a disability or health condition, whether that's around accessing food outside of the home, food shopping, the transport costs around that, additional costs based around delivery, minimum delivery charges, etc. But also those additional costs around buying the type of food or food products that are accessible and consumable by them. So that might be pre-prepared foods, ready meals, and other kinds of takeaway and delivered food as well, and really setting out how that can build up into quite significant additional costs. And then alongside that, the additional costs that disabled people face more generally, many disabled people face around additional heating, additional equipment, and other costs. Then a really important issue that people spoke about quite a lot was access to safe and special diets, and that did relate partly to special dietary requirements, gluten-free, lactose free needs, etc., but also some individual requirements, perhaps around particular brands or textures, whether that was for sort of medical reasons in terms of difficulty eating or swallowing, but also preferences that are linked to someone being neurodivergent as well. So a whole range of safe and special dietary needs that people were facing real challenges meeting those. And some, again, that was about physical access, about cost, about information being provided, and that included also around pre-prepared or ready-to-eat meals, people having some challenges being confident that they were going to be eating something that was okay for them. Then labeling and packaging was another quite big issue that came up, both in terms of, well, in the terms of size of print, people being able to understand what was in a food item, what the ingredients were, and that related back to dietary requirements as well, but also how to cook it safely uh, and store safely as well. And then also the physical issues around opening and resealing packaging if people were perhaps only eating part of something. So those that issue came up significantly. Then we also had digital exclusion issues, whether that was around people not having the equipment to be online, or also not having the skills, knowledge, or indeed the financial issues around having an internet connection and equipment around that. So a whole mix of issues around digital inclusion, and some challenges around using some of the food delivery apps as well in terms of ease of use for people, again, related sometimes to their dietary requirements, but also around navigating the kind of food they wanted. Then people did talk about energy needs and equipment. So um, I've sort of previously mentioned the sort of additional costs around energy. So people swapping over to using other kinds of cooking equipment, or in some cases, trying not to cook or heat food as much. So opting for the kinds of food that didn't require that. And then, yes, one of the newer aspects that we did pick up on was some people using air fryers as a good option for reducing energy costs. But also some questions asked about, we're at a phase now where actually not all food packaging sets out how something should be cooked in an air fryer. Some products are starting to say that, but concerns about actually are people using air fryers in a safe way as well. And then some of the intersectional issues that came up are around particularly race and ethnicity in terms of access to culturally appropriate food, and people wanting to prepare culturally appropriate food. But in some cases, while that might be something they can do, we do have examples in the report of people not them being able to actually eat the food they've prepared because of the energy taken to prepare it. Then some other intersectional issues also emerged around gender, social status, retirement, changes in households, perhaps someone being widowed or moving into different kinds of accommodation. We sort of focused on people living in their own homes, but that did include some kind of housing settings where people may have their own tenancy but do have some support as well. So groups at particular risk that came out through this work included people on low income, conditions, or dementia. And so just a couple of quotes here
Simon, you've got a little unstable connection at the moment, I think.
from um yeah, oh I don't know if there's very much I can do about that.
Okay, just carry on.
Well, is it that my audio's not good?
Yeah, it did went through a stage of just coming and going. Try again.
Okay, okay, fine. I'll try again. Um, so someone said here, I get the sausages and beans tin, so I'm replacing protein more with that. I don't think it's a huge amount of protein. I'm probably eating less, a lot less protein they need. So this was someone having challenges uh, affording sort of more traditional protein sources, I guess, for them. And then someone else saying, I think it really depends health-wise on a particular day. Some days I'll be able to maybe heat something up in the microwave. I don't think I've actually cooked a proper meal for 3 or 4 years. I can't really stand to chop things and that kind of stuff. So I think a story that a lot of people on listening to this will be familiar with. Then we talked with stakeholders and people with lived experience about the adaptations that they make. So for some, that was a combination of or different combinations of in-store and online shopping. As I've mentioned previously, use of partially pre-prepared, ready-to-eat foods. And so that might be combining, yeah, pre-cooked chicken with some elements of pre-prepared vegetables or something that might be prepared from fresh alongside that. And this did include some more processed foods as well. Um, and people using ready-to-eat food deliveries, takeaways, etc. And I guess some people making the point that for some people that might sound like a treat to be able to eat lots of takeaway food, but actually for various reasons, people wanted to be clear that actually that wasn't necessarily a treat for them. It was a necessity. There was additional costs. People were making compromises around what meals they were choosing and to some extent the healthiness of them and nutritional value. So people were keen to make that point, and people do have many people talked about access to informal support, whether that was family members, friends, or mutual support from other disabled people. But we did also hear about cases where people lack access to informal support, as mentioned in the previous slides. And I think a really important point for people was um, how a lot of the adaptations they make were enabling for them to a certain extent in terms of living independent, being able to live independently to a certain extent, but also some compromises as well. So people having different levels of choice control, healthiness, nutritional value, sort of, and some ethical costs and ethical choices, sorry, and costs as well to people. Is that any better, Leslie, connection-wise?
That's fine now.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of individual experiences. The one thing I can prepare is bananas on a roll. We have a long bread roll. It's much easier to access for me, no cooking involved. They open up, stick the banana in, and I'm good to go. And that was just someone talking about a snack rather than a meal, but something that they felt they were able to make in their own home safely, while others were away from the family home. Um, and then, yes, this point is about takeaways as well. So it's difficult seeing my money go on fast food, but sometimes I need to get takeout. I mean, the best quality that I can get for a reasonable price, but it might sound fun to other people, but it's not when you have to eat it all the time. So that's just emphasizing the point I already made. And then in terms of more formal support that stakeholders and people with lived experience talk about, people did talk about the whole range of support that many people on this webinar will be aware of, but that it really isn't consistent across the country. There's sort of people discussed how there didn't seem to be any systematic mapping of that, although I must note that just last week, a mapping tool of Meals on Wheels services around the UK has now been launched, Meals on Wheels UK. So I'd advise everybody to have a look at that. Yeah. And people also highlighted the gaps in staff skills and knowledge, particularly some home care staff, and um, uh, the time limitations that a lot of home care visits involve and how much needs to be done in the time that's available, and food and meal preparation can obviously be very squeezed within those visits. And we did hear about services being precarious, unclear of their future in terms of funding and what they would be able to offer. And again, no surprises to anyone, I assume, but massive pressure on social care, declining commissioning of sort of food-specific support, including Meals on Wheels, and the rising costs of providing food-based services around inflation and staff costs were all things that were mentioned multiple times during this project. So just a couple of lived experience quotes. They, as in home care staff, only have 15 to 20 minutes. They will not cook anything. That's a rule that they do not cook anything at all. They only microwave. They might make a cup of tea and that. So you can't order anything that requires any preparation. And then a stakeholder said, one thing we fear is people getting the food on their plate to their mouth because that's what's not happening. Social care and domiciliary care are coming in and preparing food, making sandwiches, but are not making sure that it's getting from the plate to the mouth. And I don't think either of these quotes were trying to um, uh, disrespect sort of home care workers. I think it was much more about acknowledging the limitations in the time that they have, the sort of rules and requirements that they need to abide by, that it's about the system not working for people. But obviously that second quote in particular really does put some onus, I think, on everybody working in the system to make sure that food is actually being eaten, that it can't just be prepared and put by somebody. In some cases, there needs to be an effort to make sure that someone is actually eating the food that's being prepared. And then we had some examples of good practice that were shared during the project. So there's more detail in the report itself and then links from it. But we heard about how in Monmouthshire and Wales, food support training was provided for home care and care home staff to help those staff prepare food. So not just thinking about food hygiene, but also thinking about cooking skills and preparing meals and other kind of food that people would be able to eat. And then in Fife, it's an example of Meals on Wheels services being subsidised and a real buy-in to seeing that uh, subsidising a service helps to maintain its viability because it supports it to operate at a certain level. Therefore, the turnover is there. The economies of scale are there, and very much buy-in that does prevent higher needs in an area that is challenging to deliver a Meals on Wheels service in terms of roads and access and weather, but something that is very valued by local commissioners and others. Then we also heard about a meals delivery service in North Edinburgh and Leith, where people in receipt of universal credit or pension credit are receiving those meals for free. And also we heard about some emerging practice of rethinking meal provision and meal preparation to include central production units, whether that might be based in a care home, a hospital, etc., to try and provide quality meals for multiple services to reach people. So there's just some examples. There was obviously all kinds of practice happening all over the UK, but these are four in particular that were mentioned during this project. And then we did have a look at legislation and policy in terms of understanding that landscape. And I think in conclusion, what we found was that there is a lack of national and local ownership in terms of policy and practice around ensuring that disabled and older people have access to food in their own homes across the four nations and local authority and health trusts. There are clearly people that are trying to work to ensure food access for people, but the legislation and policy doesn't always support that in terms of gaps in responsibility and a sort of grey areas of responsibilities. And also there seems to be a bit of a lack of understanding of the role of social care assessments and social care support in terms of food access, a limited understanding of the specific role that plays in terms of food. Um, there are sort of limitations in terms of legal requirements on food retailers, food industry to ensure access. They obviously need to abide by the Equality Act, but people raised issues that go beyond that. And the sort of NGO and disabled people's organizations that were a part of the project did set out how food access was an important issue for them, but they do have limited capacity to work on these issues, which alongside a gap in statutory action obviously combines to create a quite difficult situation. And then just quickly on participation, really important aspect to the project. And we basically spoke to some disabled and older people who've been involved in different kinds of involvement and engagement activities ranging from research to consultation to really formal partnerships to help shape policy. And I think, unsurprisingly, one of the conclusions is that if you are going to do this work, it does need to have a genuine commitment to really supporting participation of older and disabled people. And there are various examples of how in Greater Manchester and in Scotland, uh, two examples of work that were shared during the project showing how people were involved in really effective ways. So the report does have quite a long list of recommendations, but that's partly because we've split it by actor so that if you're a national government, you can just look at that section. So it means there's some crossover and repetition between different actors, depending on who we're aiming a recommendation at. But for national government, it was about recognizing clear responsibilities, thinking about how social care reform across the nations in different ways can include access to food as a key consideration, how there should be action on labeling and packaging and digital inclusion, but also work to support good practice and share good practice. And then some specific issues around increasing understanding of how pre-prepared foods are used in different forms, and also now monitoring the impact of changes to winter fuel payments, as well as down the line, potential other changes to social security for disabled people as well. And then for local statutory and non-statutory organisations, the recommendations include suggestions around analysis of the need and the responses and gaps in the response, thinking about food preparation training beyond food hygiene, which is of course important, but a real gap in knowledge around preparing food. But then the big challenge of the length of home care visits and how that can include food preparation and the really important point of food actually being eaten as well. And then other recommendations around support for current services that are supporting food access, innovation, making the most of contact points when people are visiting people at home, all kinds of health and care professionals may be really good conduits for support around food access, and then specifically collaborating with home from hospital services and making sure that people are going home to a good food situation and linking in with disabled people's organizations, older people's organizations, food partnerships, and other kind of local food networks. And then for the food industry, it's sort of quite broad recommendations, I suppose, around ensuring that they are really thinking about accessibility in its fullest form, ensuring consistency across their offer, maintaining and expanding ready-to-eat food, thinking about pricing, portion sizes, protein, and access to frozen foods, which were all issues that came up during the research. Providing really clear allergy and dietary information, both in real life situations and online and through apps, and really maintaining a good flow of accessible and easy to use cooking equipment. And that's, yeah, thinking now about air fryers and other kinds of newer equipment as well in terms of that. Then finally, for researchers, there are lots of under-researched areas we felt, which I know that's often the conclusion of research, that you need to do more research, but really like big areas where there does seem to be massive gaps in understanding. So that's around access to safe and special diets, the role of labeling and packaging, digital exclusion, people's own skills, motivations, and preferences, some of those intersectional issues I mentioned earlier, the use of partially prepared food, the use of equipment, support from informal carers, mutual aid networks, and support provided through home from hospital services, domiciliary and home care services, and personal assistance for disabled people in particular. So a whole range of areas that we thought there could be some really fruitful and useful research. And then also a specific issue around the role of social care assessments and care plans in supporting food access. And this option, yes, of researchers collaborating with those professionals, health and care professionals, going into people's homes and really getting a good handle, perhaps in quite a qualitative way, on terms of what's going on within people's homes. But we thought there could be a lot more that could be done around that. So the full report's available at that link, and we'll link it from the recording as well. And the best contact is Hannah. So she's hannah.lambie-mumford@sheffield.ac.uk. So I'll stop sharing now and see if there are any questions.
Thank you. That was very interesting, I think. I think people really need to go and read that and look at it on your leisure. I think there's such a lot of good nuggets in there that we need to be thinking about. There's a link on the MTF website, and perhaps it's okay for people to send you an email when they watch this at a later date if they have any questions. And as a point, you were mentioning the Meals on Wheels mapping tool. And Angelica had hoped to present today, but she couldn't. But she's recorded a presentation that we will put on the recordings when we get it on the webpage later. So thanks very much, Simon. Thank you for your time.